Madam Speaker, I'm going to speak at the outset about the shelter matter because I think it has been something that has been on the minds of everybody in this room from one perspective or another. I do come back to something that Councillor Layton quoted me on. Now I'll quote him quoting me. But it is about the question of us being able to put our heads down on the pillow and to fully, quote myself. I said that you know when you put your head down, when you want to go to sleep, that you did your best to achieve that balance between things we want to invest in to make a stronger, fairer city and the desire that people have who live in the city to make sure that they can have property taxes remain affordable to them. And I think that those are two very genuine concerns lots of people have, including people in this room. That's what I said. So I have listened to the debate. I have talked over time to the officials since the very beginning of when this proposal came forward. And I guess more so than any of that, I've been to a number of the shelters this winter. And sometimes I went as part of my published itinerary, and other times I didn't. And I was going to try and learn about the adequacy of what we were doing, especially in the winter months, and for other reasons. But I've also, when I've been there, asked a lot of questions, including asking questions in particular of frontline staff. And I will say to you, and I said this earlier on to Councillor Cressy, we were just chatting, and I came away from this thinking that these places were well staffed, and by that I don't mean that they were sort of one way or the other in any kind of excessive or understaffed kind of situation, but the more important thing I came away having heard over and over again, not unanimously but certainly the majority opinion, was that these kinds of changes could be made without affecting the service delivery to the people that we are trying to help in the shelters. And so I am going to vote to maintain the provision in the budget as it is, but I'm moving an amendment to Councillor DiCiano's motion, rather than have a report come back from our new general manager in this area, that we get an immediate report back by April, I'm proposing April the 30th of this year. I think that will be on a timely enough basis that we will have his perspective on this based on whatever data he can review in that time. And I think, quite frankly, I can't quote what the purple pages say here for reasons you understand, but that I think, given that no one was to lose their job, people were to be moved and so on, it wasn't as if there was going to be some announcement made tomorrow morning that all these positions were going to be disappearing. And so I think what it does is allows us to do this in the way that we should be doing it. It was not a kind of a black or white, yes or no, up or down sort of way, but rather to get some facts from the new person in charge and come back both on the question of the money and on the question of the service. And I can pledge to you, I will tell you as one member of this council and as the mayor, that when that report comes back, I'll be reading it seriously and not viewing it as some sort of window dressing exercise or something to try and placate anybody. And I'm not sure it'll change a vote, but it certainly makes me feel that in addition to the inquiries that I've made consistently since the beginning, and in addition to the inquiries I've made of frontline staff and so on, that we will have a more complete, shall I say, or a different report in front of us because it's being written by a different person based on different considerations. But we will proceed with at least I will vote to proceed with the budget provisions as they are. I would also take note, Madam Speaker, that this is a budget, and I trust our staff. This came from a staff recommendation, not from something that was concocted by a politician. It came from a staff recommendation as part of the budget process. I won't reiterate what I said and many others have said about the fact, and it is very frustrating, and it's part of politics, I guess, I understand that, but that a budget that does make a big additional investment in transit somehow gets translated into a cutback. A budget that makes a big additional investment in housing somehow gets translated into a cutback. A $250 million investment in repairs to Toronto community housing can in no way be described as a cutback. The additional funding on a record level basis to the Toronto community housing can in no fair way be described as a cutback. But I guess that's the way things work in the context of this chamber, and I'm glad that for the most part today the discussion has been other than on that kind of a basis. But I want to just, and I could say it doesn't cut arts funding, it doesn't cut libraries, in fact it increases the library budget, it increases their hours, it does add childcare subsidies more, quite frankly, than the well-informed critic on this, the most informed probably member of council on this, originally suggested should be done for this year. And I know the yardsticks can change after we said yes, we'll do that and we'll do more, but the bottom line is it's more than was asked for. I could read the quote out of the newspaper from when we met earlier on. And yes, it does fund 145 more long-term care beds, 15,000 kids in the student nutrition program. But I want to just conclude my remarks by saying this. Somebody made reference earlier on to Groundhog Day. And anybody who wants to be honest in this chamber knows the difference between 2% and 4.26% or just about anything else that's been discussed in here today is not going to be the Groundhog Day escape plan. And that's why I remarked earlier on the fact that the real solution to this, and a couple of people, Councillor Bilo and others did, is that I believe, and I'm not trying to put praise onto myself, but I believe I've earned the respect of the other governments in the way that I've tried to carry out my responsibilities on your behalf. And now I need your support, because I can tell you with a couple of exceptions, it's been pretty lonely so far, the way in which people in this chamber choose to allocate their time, whether it's to be critical of the administration or critical of somebody else in this room, as opposed to pointing the spotlight where it needs to be pointed, which is one on those other governments. Toronto is at a moment in time that I don't think we've ever been at before in terms of the world looking at us, seeing that we have a different narrative here on how we live together, seeing the opportunity that exists here, seeing that people want to come here that are talented and job creators and risk takers. And we need those other governments to step up as our partners now to make sure that we can make the investments in childcare, in housing, in transit, in a proper partnership way that's funded and is actually long-term. And I think that that's the real task in front of us if we want to avoid repeating Groundhog Day over and over again at next year's budget and the one after that and the one after that. Let's be candid. The difference between 2 and 4% on the property tax is not going to produce enough money to solve those problems. We all know that, and it's fine to have that debate, but really the debate we need to have is with other people that are not stepping up and doing their job for the economic engine of this country, the greatest city in this country, and a city that we're proud of because it's strong and because it's fair, and we need to keep it that way. So I'll be voting for the budget, obviously, Madam Speaker. I will be opposing, subject to my amendment, the shelter positions being reinstated and support the budget motion. I'll be supporting Councillor Shiner's motion on Yonge Street. I'll be opposing the newsletter budget motion. I think that would be a bad step for us. So we'll take it from there, and I thank everybody involved in this, and including all the members of Council, for what I think has been a very reasonable and rational debate today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. We do have some questions. Councillor Cressy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to clarify the motion that you put forward regarding shelters. So just to be crystal clear, your motion still cuts 10 frontline staff in this budget, with a report back on whether we should have done that. Is that correct?
Yes, it does. And I say that to Councillor Cressy through Madam Speaker on the basis that there was a rationale provided for us. Unfortunately, when I say unfortunately, it's in the purple sheets, and it's based, in my case, on a lot of questioning I've done of frontline staff about this. And so I'm confident that between now and April, first of all, probably not much of this will actually happen. And that in the event the report comes back, I've given you my own pledge, to the extent that means anything, that I'm going to be looking at it very carefully as a very serious report, which I presume will either say we should do this or we shouldn't, or it will have a negative impact or it won't, and may also suggest other means by which we achieve the savings we have to achieve in the budget and do it a different way. We have a new person in charge of this, and I'm confident, I know of his abilities, we all do because he's been elsewhere in our government, and so I view this as a real substantive report, not a piece of window dressing.
Mr. Mayor, I know you've listened to the debate closely. You are aware that General Manager has already said both at your executive committee and at Council that this will have a negative impact. The General Manager has already said that. You are aware of that, right?
I'm aware that, but I also look at what it says in the materials, and again, I can't quote them, but let's just put it on the basis that the words that I've read reassure me that whatever impact it has, because I can't stand here and say that if you take 10 positions out, it's not, no one's going to notice because, at all, but the description of the service impact that I've heard from frontline people, from the reports that we have in front of us, have been that they're very, very minimal, and that in many cases we'll be able to fill in behind those people and make things as they should be for our shelter residents.
But in the reports you've read and your visits to shelters, what evidence have you seen that would justify any minimal level of cuts to the shelter system? What evidence have you seen that would justify minimal cuts?
I have the advantage, I guess, of having been through this in many different leadership positions over time, when many people will say that you can't make a change and you can't streamline things and you can't make things more efficient because there's going to be a dire consequence from it. And every time, pretty much, it has turned out to be the case that you can, by being more productive, by being imaginative, by having people do things differently, that you can provide sometimes even a better level of service with fewer people. And so I will just say to you that that is why I'm asking for this report, because we'll then have aside from answers to questions at executive committee meetings, we will have a formal, thoughtful 60-day report from the person now in charge of this, and I've told you I'm going to respect that report in the most as much as I can in terms of what it says and how we might go about this, and we'll be guided very much by what it says.
And so I guess my final question would be, do I have your word? Does council have your word that if staff say that these cuts will negatively impact the quality of service people who use our shelters to receive, that you will support staff's recommendations?
I am telling you that if staff comes back and says there's going to be a material impact on the service levels to people, I will expect, because I'm going to talk to them about this as we all can, that they will also tell us ways in which we might make other changes that are not staff affecting or in some way to try and achieve the savings here. But that's why I want to leave this there, because they may or may not come back with something that's better than what's suggested here. But I very much will value their analysis of this, and that's why I'm asking for the report to be done so soon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Layton.
Through you, Madam Speaker. First of all, I'll offer anytime I will go to Queen's Park with you and do the advocacy that needs to be done. I've been out there on a couple of occasions now, and I know, as you have as well, I've never gotten an invite to join your meetings with the Premier, which I would happily glad to call them out, to call them out when they don't do what they tell you that they're going to do, and then you come here. I will happily be a partner in that. My question is around, you mentioned in your remarks that these were staff proposals. These proposals for the recommendations were coming directly from staff, correct?
I have the papers right here.
Now, maybe you weren't there at Budget Committee when staff from shelters, staff from long-term care, and staff from children's services indicated that they wouldn't, in fact, be bringing forward requests like this for service level adjustments if it wasn't for the request that came from you to reduce their budgets by 2.6%.
Madam Speaker, and through you to Councillor Layton, I'll say this. When they were asked out of the entire budget, and I've forgotten the magnitude of the entire budget, but we all know it's a lot of money. When they were asked out of the entire budget what they would come forward with, I would assume two things, and they're professional and they're compassionate public servants, that they are going to pick the thing to do. Yes, because I freely admit, and I've said this many, many times, not only do I not apologize for the fact we asked people to identify possible efficiencies, I'm proud of the fact that we did it, and I'm equally proud of the fact that many of them we said no to, because that's what our responsibility is at the end, just as it's theirs to make proposals. But I will say to you, that I treat it as a recommendation that they were prepared to put forward when out of the entire budget, where they were asked to identify 2.6%, this was one of the things they said, and it was accompanied, as you know, by commentary, whatever may have been said at the meetings, commentary I have in front of me, saying repeatedly that the service impacts, if any, would be minimal, that they could make up for that in other ways, and I've asked frontline staff about that, let alone our own management, and been told the same thing.
Yes, but then perhaps it's clear that you shouldn't be saying that these are simply requests from staff or recommendations from staff, when in fact we asked them to start looking at what they could cut. It's not that they advanced it saying this would not have an impact. This is just
I will concede that point, but I trust
you
will also concede through you, Madam Speaker, Councillor Layton, that of all the things they could have picked, they had absolutely free rein to pick anything they wanted out of the budget to look at achieving those savings, and they came forward. So unless someone is going to suggest that they would have done this in some sort of way to sabotage people at the shelters, which I don't suggest because they are professional, compassionate public servants, I know them, I work with them, then I would say to you, they brought these things forward in good faith, believing their own words that are in the papers accompanying the recommendation or accompanying the option, which is that they can find ways with other staff to make sure that the people who live in the shelters, who are among our most vulnerable citizens, do not suffer because of the changes we're making here. And I repeat what I said earlier. I've seen time and time and time again that when there are instances where you sometimes make do with fewer people, it is in fact possible very often to achieve better levels of service for people than it was the case. Just because you have more people doesn't mean you're going to provide better service. It depends how you provide it, how you go about it, how they're managed, and so on.
David?
So I just want to ask, what is a true service level impact as opposed to a false service level impact?
Well, I think what was meant there was that the, Madam Speaker, through you to the councillor, that it was said in previous discussion that the new general manager in the area was going to access data that hasn't necessarily been available before. I've been told this many times, that there was a limited amount of data available upon which to make big decisions, including ones like this. And true, I think is, and whether that's the right word or not, that wasn't the part of the motion that I drafted. I simply changed the date.